This morning, we're going to be looking primarily at the story of Moses and the golden calf, but let's set it in its context. Remember, the children of Israel have just crossed the Red Sea, and they're on their 40-year journey toward the promised land. But here you have up to 1 million people who've crossed the Red Sea. They have been dominated all of their lives by the Pharaoh, and suddenly they have found freedom, and they don't know what to do with it, and they don't know what the future's about. They're confused, and so they began coming to Moses, wanting directions from Moses about what they're going to be doing. And so Moses is spending all day, every day, 7 days a week, dealing with people who are frightened about the future. And he's wearing himself out. And his daddy-in-law comes to him and says, Moses, you've got to have some help. So I'm going to suggest that you gather together some men, the wisest men among you, and divide the people up among those men and let those men deal with the questions and complaints, the criticisms of the people. And so Moses followed Jethro's advice and did just that. And while they're in the process of being divided up and organized, Moses goes up on Mount Sinai and he meets God. And God says to Moses in the 19th chapter of the book of Exodus, he says, Moses, go back down and tell the people that in 3 days, I'm going to deliver instructions to you up on the mountain. Gather the people around Mount Sinai and tell them not to touch the mountain. If they touch the mountain, they're going to die. Well, that scares the living daylights out of a lot of them. And on the 3rd day, Moses goes up on the mountain and it begins to thunder and lightning and making all sorts of noise on the mountain. What do you think that does to the people who are gathered down at the base of the mountain? And it was at that time that God gave to Moses the 10 commandments. And those 10 commandments are listed in chapter 20, beginning with the first verse of chapter 20. Now let's look at chapter 20, verse 18. And all the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. Then they said to Moses, speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But let not God speak to us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. And so Moses goes back up on Mount Sinai and he doesn't come down. And people begin to get concerned about where is our leader? And they decided that God had killed Moses up on top of the mountain. So that brings us to the 32nd chapter. Now, let me remind you that between chapter 20 and chapter 32, there are all these laws that God has given to Moses to share with the children of Israel. And when you read all of that passage, you see why Moses didn't come down off the mountain immediately. It took a while for God to give so many laws and regulations to help the children of Israel, because here they are. They're out in the desert. They don't have any rules, regulations, constitution, lawyers, judges, nobody except Moses and the men with whom he surrounded himself. So he's up on the mountain a long time, and the people really get concerned, and they finally decide that they needed to build a god to worship down at the base of the mountain. And so they persuaded Moses' brother to build them a god. And Aaron collected all of the jewelry, golden jewelry, from primarily the women. It says they tore their earrings off. Well, that sounds rather brutal, but have you ever stopped to think about these slaves who've just escaped years of captivity? Most of them have known nothing but captivity all their lives. Having gold earrings, some of them did. And Aaron gathered these earrings and other gold pieces together and formed a golden calf. Now, when Moses comes down off the mountain and sees the golden calf, he becomes very angry with Aaron. And you remember Aaron said, well, I just threw this in the fire and the golden calf came out. Well, I doubt that, but that's what Aaron tells his brother Moses. And Moses has the 10 Commandments with him, and he throws them down on a stone and breaks them all to pieces in his anger. And then a strange thing happens. God gets angry. And Moses, who's been angry enough to destroy the 10 Commandments, starts pleading with God. And because God has decided that he's going to destroy all the children of Israel because he had done such good for them, and they had neglected him and gone against him by building this golden calf. And of course, one of the first commandments was not to build any graven images in the likeness of God. And so here immediately they have destroyed the first commandment. So God gets angry and he says, I'm going to destroy them all. Well, Moses, who's been angry, then turns to God to try to placate God and cool God down. And Moses uses some wonderful logic in pleading with God. First thing he said was, if you destroy them, think of what the Egyptians are going to think about you. You brought them out here in the wilderness and killed them. So the Egyptians are going to think you're a mighty mean guy to do all that. And then he says in that 32nd chapter, in his plea, he says, you're angry, and I know that, but if you destroy them, you are going to go against the promises that you made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, because you told them that you were going to build a nation on them that the people would be as many as the sands of the sea. And so you are breaking your promises to the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if you kill them. And pretty impressive logic on Moses' part. And then Moses begins to persuade God to change his mind. Now, this is a real breakthrough in our view of God in the Old Testament. Well, this is the first time that we find God is reasonable, that God can be confronted, that God can be persuaded. After all, What is the purpose of prayer if God can't change his mind? Why should any of us pray about anything if God has already made up his mind? Well, God changes his mind and he listens to Moses and he does not destroy the children of Israel. Our last passage of the morning is from the 33rd chapter, verses 9 through 17. And here we find another encounter of Moses and God. Now, Moses is needing some reassurance about now. So he asked God if he can see God's face. And God tells him to hide in the cleft of the rock and that God is going to walk by, but Moses is not to take a peek until God has already walked by and Moses can look at God's backside. And he explains to Moses that if you see the face of God, you'll die. So don't look till I'm by. And Moses doesn't look, and God walks by, and he sees God walk by. And it evidently was the kind of reassurance that Moses needed at that time in his life, and he remained faithful to God from that point forward. So there we have it, the case of the golden calf. And it's a wonderful passage, and we would all do well to remember that we have a habit of erecting golden calves as well, and how empty, temporary, and shallow that can be. God bless you all very much.